right, so let's get started because this is such a subject matter that I'm very passionate about. And it's something that, like I mentioned before, now we're starting to move. We're starting to get into motion as a team. We started off with culture and now we're moving into to really being productive. And so I want you to see something on my website. If you kind of bookmark brycekinney.com, if you look up in the very top corner over here, there's something that says free content. All right above my head, right above my mohawk. I'm gonna use my mohawk as a pointer today. But this says free content right there, right? That is where all of these webinars will eventually live. And maybe I might only put one or two up there, but I might link it to my Vimeo account. So at some point, I want you to have access to all of the information. Melt the Ice, of course, was talking about personality traits, shifting your team into a sense of urgency, helping them understand what's at stake. The last one I thought was so productive, talking about crushing your goals, meaning, hey, you don't wait for 100% participation, right? You don't have to wait for 100% of your team to get on board with where your team is going. If you can find those early adopters, sometimes it's just 2 to 3 people that are like, yep, I want to go chase after that trophy. And you can build it to 20% of your team being on board, being believers of the team vision and where the goal is going. Sometimes that's all you need. Get started with those 20% and watch the rest of the 80%. Maybe you won't ever have 100% participation in a team goal, but you'll see a lot of those 80% that'll get on board, right? They want to see the team moving first before they decide to trust that they want to be a part of that. Well, today, that's the whole point of what we're talking about with finding traction and avoiding burnout. Look, burnout is a very real thing, isn't it? And we've all experienced it. And I think it takes a different form for each of us. And that's kind of what I actually want to simplify this as much as we can today and talking about what burnout really looks like. So that's our roadmap, right? Let's talk deeper about burnout, right? I've got a PDF I'm going to be sending you. Instead of waiting for it to come out in an email, I honestly never thought about just dropping it into the chat here on Zoom. So there you go. We'll be able to download that. And if you're in a room with a group of people, I know some of us have 35 people that are in a room right now hanging out. Shout out to you all, by the way. But if you can't download it from the team chat, just let me know. You can email me directly, bryce@brycekinney.com. And I think you've got that. You can just respond to the emails that you've been getting, and I'll send you the PDF that way. But step number 2, anti-corporate anxiety prescription. Okay. I'm going to put on a pharmacist hat for a second, for a few minutes today, and give you my prescription for battling corporate anxiety, battling what I would believe is burnout. All right. And then we're going to end with some Q&A. Okay. So this PDF, it is ready. And the reason why I always tell you about this PDF is because, yes, I want you to take notes, but I want you to be part of this discussion with me. I want you to just kind of get the broad picture and then take that PDF after today and then be able to dive deeper into it on your own, right? So I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes version at the end. And yes, like I said, take notes, but be with us in this conversation. All right, so this stat, right? This is kind of a newest stat. It came out off of Indeed. I think a lot of you use Indeed for a lot of your staffing. 61% of remote workers, but 53% of on-site workers now find it more difficult to unplug from work during off hours, meaning they're 53% of people are taking home work, right? Taking work home with them. Maybe the situation. I think a lot of times it's the emotional stuff in our jobs that it's so hard to unplug. Maybe it was something that a colleague said to that person, right? That they're almost taking home the emotion that maybe it was a customer that didn't treat them the right way, and they're taking those feelings home. But it could be extra work, right? It could be some extra training, some things that they just need to do on their own. But a lot of times it takes a very unproductive pathway. In fact, this was the stat that scared me the most. Burned out employees, people that would describe themselves as being burned out, are 23%, right? Almost a quarter of people that say they're burned out, they're 23% more likely to visit the emergency room. This is what happened to me. I'm going to get very transparent with you because in my very first year driving the Great Clips Mohawk Warrior truck, I ended up in the emergency room. All right. I was in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and it was our very first year in this partnership. And if you know my story enough, you know I was built for this chance. I had wanted so badly in professional drag racing for a company, a notable company like Great Clips, to give me a shot and say, hey, we're going to sponsor you. We're going to come in here and support you. And so I was in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and this was probably about, let's call it, 6 to 8 weeks into the season. The season had not been going very well. Our team just had not been gelling. And I attribute that a lot actually to a cultural mishap with an individual that I would have described as very cancerous. All right. And so we didn't really have a very good culture. We were having a lot of mechanical issues with the truck. And long story short, I was crashing a lot. Now, part of that was driver error. Okay. So I'm not the one to, what is it? A bad craftsman blames his tools, right? So as a driver, I was learning a lot as well, but I was struggling with getting the truck to perform the right way. And I was actually crashing a lot unnecessarily. And so Saturday night comes around and I crash again on a wheelie competition, and it was a bad crash. I hit the top of the cage, the top of the Mohawk Warrior truck. And if you're curious, there are no shocks on that part of the truck. And it landed so hard that whenever the crane of shame, as I like to call it, the guy that comes out and pulls the truck back on all four tires, he came back and grabbed me and hooked me and brought me back over. And I was seeing the Tweety birds run across my dashboard. Okay. I had stars all over. And I probably was experiencing concussion symptoms, to be honest with you, but it was that bad of a hit. And I remember getting out of the truck and I was so discouraged. My crew chief that was almost his final straw too. I remember getting back to the back of the pit area, and he had taken off his headset. He was sitting in the trailer and he was kind of feeling sorry for himself. And I'm thinking to myself, look, I just got my brains beat out there. So why can't we come together and figure this out and again, regroup as a team? And I felt like I had lost him. I felt like I lost my partner at that moment. And I went to bed that night and I felt okay, but I woke up and it's like my vision was blurred. It's like I didn't have any of the peripheral vision. It felt like I was looking through a straw. And I got to the venue for our next event that morning, and I was not looking forward to driving the truck. I was so overly anxious. And then I got a call from the guy who's kind of our boss, our supervisor in Monster Jam. And he says, hey, Bryce, look, the team's very frustrated. We're frustrated. You have got to avoid crashing today. No crashing. Keep the truck on all four tires today. That's your job. And I told him, I said, look, I don't know if I could physically take another crash. So that's perfectly fine with me. And I didn't really feel like there was a support. That was not a supportive conversation. That was one of those conversations that maybe you've given someone, hey, Jennifer, don't be late today for your shift. I'm just warning you, don't be late today, right? You had some of those calls that you've had to make, and we've all been on the other end of that call too. But it was like the final straw that broke me. And I was waiting in the locker room, and thankfully there was an event manager that saw that something was wrong with me. I don't know if it was the way I looked. I don't know if it was the way I was speaking, but I was completely out of sorts. I was not in a positive position. Like I wasn't encouraging people and things like that. And he said, Bryce, stop what you're doing, and I want you to go see the medics. And so I went to the medics. They hooked me up with all this stuff. And they said, Bryce, your blood pressure is 180 over 120. Now, I know if you're like me, and if I didn't have an example like this, then those numbers wouldn't mean anything to me. But those are really bad numbers. What is a normal number? 120 over 60? I was 180 over about 120. Okay. That was very bad numbers. When they told me that, they said, look, you've got to either settle down. We want to take you to the emergency room immediately because something's going on. When they told me my numbers, I started freaking out even more. My numbers went up to 200 over about 150, 160. Those are the same numbers that people experience in the midst of a heart attack. So these medics were looking at me and they were like, what do you feel okay? Do you have chest pains? Because all of the numbers that you're showing us right now show us that you're having an active heart attack. Guys, I was 27 years old. I was in great shape. There was nothing physically that would have made this occur. And as soon, I remember calling my dad, and in that moment, because I felt like it was ridiculous to have to go to the ER in this situation. And I called my father, and he's always been that health confidant for me. I told him what was going on. He said, Bryce, you're having a panic attack. And my dad, you would have to know him, but like I still give him a hard time about his next comment. He said, "Is there anywhere there at the stadium, which was basically a horse festival stadium, right there in Albuquerque? It wasn't even like one of these big football stadiums." He said, "Bryce, is there anywhere there in that Coliseum that might be selling wine?" He said, can you go and get a glass of wine? And just to kind of like calm yourself down. So I still give him a hard time because I'm like, this is a little bit of a bigger situation than a glass of wine, Dad. But it did help me realize, like, hey, I laid down on my back. He said to get an ice pack on the back of my neck to elevate my legs and to just work through breathing. And then he also said, look, he knew I didn't want to go to the ER in that situation. Looking back, I should have immediately just went to the ER, right? But I fought against that. And so what was happening was I had let all of this anxiety build up in me, and I did not know what it felt like because I'd never had a panic attack before. And and what had led up to causing that situation is exactly what I want to share with you today, because it's not as complex as we feel like it is. There are certain signs to follow along the pathway to avoid getting to that level. And so let's put your management hat back on for just a second. Remember from our urgency webinar, right? How to shift your team into a sense of urgency. We talked about something called inverted thinking. So I want you to think about somebody on your team right now that may or may not struggle with a little bit of anxiety. Okay. And if you are taking notes, just write their name down on a sheet of paper. If your goal was to burn out that person, how could you ensure that you would make that happen? How could you definitely cause that person to become so overwhelmed to the point that they are officially burned out of their role right now? Okay. And as you're jotting a couple notes, I'm going to give you some of mine. Number one, overwork them. That's the easiest thing. So again, if you get nothing out of today other than realizing that burnout is not just about feeling overworked, I think being overworked is a symptom of a greater issue. All right. But number one, if I was wanting to make sure I burned out, let's say for myself, my crew chief, I would make sure that they were overworked. Number two, I would avoid clear communication. Right. When my crew chief, after I crashed that night in Albuquerque, and he went to the trailer and he took off his headset, what happened? That destroyed our communication. There was no more ability for us to have that rah-rah moment, for him to confront me, for me to look at him and, and have that moment. That ensured that he was over it as well. And so if you're thinking about that team member, just make sure, if you were going to make sure that they got burned out, make sure that they're out of the loop. Number three, over exaggerate the situation. If I wanted to make sure that I burned out somebody, I would make that situation feel bigger than it actually was. And my last one here, number four, was I would make sure that I reduced their self-belief to the point that I don't think that they would ever think that they could actually make it through that tough stuff, right? I would reduce their self-belief if I was wanting to ensure that they became burned out. So the good thing about this inverted thinking, it's easier sometimes to now flip it and go, okay, well, if we want to avoid our team members, because I know that's why each of you are on this webinar, right? Yes, you're going to get something from this today as an individual, but today could make you the most effective leader, the most effective cultural leader that you've ever been, because you're going to take the person that's struggling, that may not be saying that they're struggling, and you're going to breathe life into them, right? So yeah, you're going to get something from this individually, but also as a team member, all right? So what does that really look like, okay? Where does this corporate anxiety, because let's take the word burnout away for just a second. And if burnout is almost a symptom of a greater cause, let's settle this down into corporate anxiety. That's what I was having. I was so overwhelmed in Albuquerque for two reasons. Number one, on the track, I was failing. And number two, I felt like because I was failing back, and this was 2017, I felt like I was ruining this partnership, this brand new, exciting partnership with Great Clips. I felt like I was screwing it all up. And then I was worried, like, oh my gosh, did I make the wrong decision to leave my corporate job to do this with Monster Jam? Can you believe it? Like, if you've had a chance for us to interact, this is 8 years ago that this happened. And I can't imagine not having made this decision. But that year one, guys, if I didn't have a 3-year contract, I probably would have looked at Monster Jam and said, guys, I'm out. And you and I wouldn't be on this webinar today because that corporate anxiety had built up. So let's simplify it. All right. I believe that corporate anxiety is an overestimation of our situation and an underestimation of ourselves. It is an overestimation of our situation and an underestimation of ourselves. And you could take the corporate word out of that phrase right there. That's what anxiety is. If you've ever suffered from panic attacks and things like that, and by the way, a lot of us have, but if you've ever dealt with just anxiety on a daily basis, isn't that really what's going on? We're overestimating we think the situation is beyond our control. And we doubt that we really have what it takes as people, as an individual, to handle that situation. And the more I've realized in myself as I've gone down this Monster Jam pathway, and whenever I'm about to hit the stage for a keynote talk, you don't think that that's an anxiety-ridden development, right? And an opportunity it is. But whenever I felt like, oh my gosh, I'm about to go speak in front of 3,500 people, do I really have what it takes for this moment? I simply reverse those two things.
I feel like,
right?
You don't want to go
I
to
lessen,
church, but yet when you finally go, the pastor's talking.
I lessen the situation and I increase my self-belief. Okay. And so that's really what that is. Simplify what anxiety looks like. So I've got some prescriptions for you. Let's look at the very first prescription I will give you for the situation itself is you've got to remember to control the controllables. Okay. When I look at the situation, like let's say I'm about to hit the stage on a keynote talk, I cannot control how those people will interact with me. I can really only control two things: my actions and my attitudes, right? And so I can only control me hitting the stage and those first 5 words out of my mouth to get everyone pumped up. I can't control if 3,500 people are on their phones or if they're looking at me, if they're cheering for me or if they're booing for me. I can't control their reaction. I can only control what I'm doing, and I can control my attitudes, but in my attitude before I hit that stage. So I want to help you with this. So really the actions, if I'm sitting across the table from somebody, my number one question I'll ask them when they're struggling in that situation to simplify and really if they're overestimating that situation, I'm going to look at them and say, okay, with this situation, what out of this situation is going to matter 5 years from today? Right? That's my number one question. What's going to matter 5 years from right now? And there's sometimes I had a mentor tell me, look, if it doesn't matter in 5 years, it doesn't matter now. That takes all kinds of anxiety off of my shoulder. Think about, again, go back to Albuquerque. Was it going to matter 5 years from then if I crashed that day, if I did something special in that event that day? 5 years. So fast forward from 2017, it would have been 2022. We would have been coming out of the pandemic. No, trust me, nothing from that Albuquerque debacle with me where I ended up going to the emergency room, because I eventually did. I didn't finish that part of the story. But after it was 200 over 160 and I was laying there, I was trying to get my heart rate down. It wasn't working. I went to the ER. After spending a couple hours in the ER, they came back and they said, Bryce, your heart rate's down to normal levels. We don't know what happened. They, let me pack my bags and I left. So thinking back to that, did anything matter in 2022, 5 years from that moment happening in 2017? The answer to that is a resounding no. Nothing happened. Nothing mattered about that weekend in Albuquerque 5 years from that day. So it takes the bigness out of that moment that I felt that day and the struggle and the pain that I felt. it lessened and it would have lessened in that moment. The second prescription that around attitudes, what's the most positive outcome possible for this situation? That will shift your attitude or your team members' attitudes. Look, if you don't have these two questions in your back pocket dealing with your team, you're doing them a disservice culturally. You need to memorize these, because when you have someone that's coming up that's fussing to you about a colleague and what they said, right? There's a chance it could, if the colleague said something that was so disruptive to your culture, could that matter in 5 years? Absolutely. What if half of your staff leaves because someone said something that was so inappropriate? Right. So it does have the potential to matter in 5 years. But the question is, if you ask that individual, will this matter in 5 years? And they can't give you a good answer. It's going to help them mentally get past that and go back to saying, what can I do right now that will matter in 5 years? Maybe it's going back and responding the right way to my colleague. Maybe it's treating that next customer with respect that walks through that door and ensuring that they're okay. Okay. I can control my actions and I can control my attitudes. If you can come up with something else that you can control 100%, please put it in the chat or email me. I am yet to find something that I can control outside of those two areas, but have those questions in your back pocket. And again, they're on the PDF. Okay. I'm going to send in just a minute. Lastly, an underestimation of ourselves. This one is so big because I think that this is your number one job as a leader, to help each of your team members in this situation. It's that moment when we look into the mirror and we're thinking, do we really have what it takes for this situation? Right. And again, if you've heard me on a keynote, you've heard me say that I get so tired of this mindset of, well, we just got to fake it till we make it. How many times have we said that? The first time you gave that haircut in the salon behind the chair, you had that first customer sitting in the seat. The first time I ever got into a Monster Jam truck, it was Birmingham, Alabama. When I hit that floor, it was the first time that people were in the stands watching me. Right. And in that moment, I was telling myself back then, that was 16. I was telling myself, Bryce, just fake it till you make it. And I realized that that doesn't help me believe that I have what it takes. So your second prescription today is not fake it till you make it. It's believe it until you become it. Now, as I've talked about this,
Believe it till you become it.
That's right, Brandy. That's right. So one of the things that's so interesting is I've looked at this and I've said, okay, whenever I'm looking in the mirror and I want to come up with those question marks, there's really two elements that I have personally found that allows me to believe it until I become it. One is in the past and one is in the future, meaning in the past, right? I can look at that and I can say, when have I won before? I can look in the truck right now today and I can say, man, if I go out there today, it's 2024. If I'm hitting a stadium floor and I'm nervous because we've got 55,000 people, you know what I do? I go back to saying, hey, but buddy, 2 weeks ago, you won freestyle. 2 weeks ago, you won the trophy. 2 weeks ago, this happened. What about the next time I'm about to hit the stage for a keynote, right? All I can think about is, yeah, but remember the last time you hit the stage and everybody went crazy? Okay. I can look at the past. So when have I won before? And the second question is the future question. Visualizing that win that can come, meaning what does the trophy really look like? When have I won in the past? And what's it going to look like when I win in this situation? When this problem turns into a victory? What does that look like? What is success going to look like? Because it takes it out of something that is just an idea on paper that you and the team came up with. It's no longer just a vision, and it becomes visionary. Meaning, until you can stop and imagine yourself with that team member, the one that you wrote down on your paper earlier that might struggle with anxiety more than everyone else, what happens when that person no longer deals with anxiety and they're number one in your salon at customer return percentage or product sales or whatever it is as a team? Can you visualize her or him winning in that situation, becoming victorious? If you can visualize that trophy, that end result, right? That's how you're able to build self-belief. Your job as a leader, leadership is influence, nothing more and nothing less. My question oftentimes to people is, how in the world do you expect to influence someone that has no self-belief in themselves? When in doubt, if you will step in at their level and you will remind them, maybe you're sitting down with Jennifer, right? I think that's the name I used before of the example. Maybe you're sitting down with Jennifer and they have no self-belief. Can you go back and help them ask these two questions? When have you wanted this before? Oh, I've never sold a product in my life. Okay, maybe you got to go back to high school. Maybe they, I don't know. Maybe they sold brownies at a food fair in middle school. I don't know what it is. All of us have success in the things at some point, no matter how small it may feel. I've got to go back to remembering what that victory looked and felt like. Can I help Jennifer do the same? And then I'm going to paint that picture as the leader and helping her see herself with that win in that category that I'm helping her to go and get, and visualize that victory moving forward. Okay. So those are really the only two elements that you'll ever find that I have ever found. And if you don't get anything else from today, please just remember this one thing. It takes just as much effort to doubt as it does to believe. You might as well choose to believe. You're going to go through the same pain, the same anguish, either way, either direction. By the way, it takes just as much effort to doubt in that team member as it does to believe in that team member. So you better be careful at which one you're doing. It's easy after someone's been a part of the team and you've seen them fail time and time again. It's easy and human nature to start to doubt that they have what it takes. But let's get real honest. That individual has doubted in themselves for years. What if you were the very last human being on this earth to ever believe in them, that has that opportunity? If you just kind of let them go and you let that rope and them kind of fade off into the sunset, right? And maybe they decide to quit and they go and do a different career and no one else the rest of their life ever believes them. You have the chance to change the course of their life in just that way. Meaning, if you choose to believe in that person, believe that Jennifer can go and actually accomplish those things instead of doubt in Jennifer, then what if that's all the difference maker that they would ever need and ever want? And so corporate anxiety, we need to do this where we're looking at our situations. And again, we've started off with the cultural piece. That's why I Melt the Ice, that webinar from the very first time, talking about cholerics and sanguines and melancholy and phlegmatics. It's so critical because you need to know how that individual is wired, right? You need to help them understand what's at stake, which was our second webinar, right? We need to understand that we don't need everyone on board to start after and chase after a goal. But lastly, when that ship leaves the station and you start to recognize people on your team and in your salons that are starting to get really anxious, stop what you're doing, look at the situation and say, are they overestimating the situation? Are they over exaggerating in it? And are they underestimating themselves? If you can help take the magic off of the bigness of what you're doing as a team, help them realize, look, we're coming at this as a team. This is what we're going to do. This is why we're going to accomplish it. And this is why I think that you're such a great fit for us to go and do that. Why we need your specific skill sets to pull it off if you choose to be on board. Now, all of a sudden, you have less and less anxiety, and you will absolutely see less burnout from your team. They'll be able to leave work at work. They'll be able to go home and get renewed, and they'll come in that next morning and they will be ready to rip the door from the frame, ready to partner with you, ready to partner with their colleagues and go and do something very, very special. And you won't have anxiety constantly attacking your group and going to do that.